Have you ever wanted to fly like a bird soaring through the sky, or buzz like a bumblebee, or flutter like a butterfly? Wouldn't it be amazing if we had some wings? Wings! Sadly, though, my wings aren't going to get me very far. Humans weren't designed to fly, and we haven't evolved that way. So instead, let's explore some magnificent flying machines that humans have invented. We've got loads of flying toys that you can have a look at with this video. So if you'd like to follow along, you're going to need to print out the templates. This one is on card, and the rocket templates and the hoop flyers printed on paper. We're going to need a paper straw to stick in the middle for our hoop flyer, and a straw to launch your rockets. We're going to need a plastic bag and some string and a cuddly toy to make a parachute. We're going to need some bamboo skewers, some big blobs of blue tack, a hairdryer, some paper, some card and a hole puncher to test out an airfoil, some paper clips to go on the bottom of the paper copters, and things to stick it together. So some scissors, some glue and some sticky tape. So why can't we fly like a bird? Well, we're just not built like birds. Birds have a really interesting body shape and structure. Their shape is really streamlined to allow them to travel through the air with ease. Their body is also really muscular. In fact, the majority of a bird's body weight is made from its muscle mass. Birds also have hollow bones. That doesn't mean that what they're made of is weaker. It just means there's lots of little air spaces, little pockets of air inside of the bones, and this makes them really light and able to fly. Now, birds aren't the only animals with wings, and interestingly, lots of other animals have designed and evolved different ways in order to take flight into the skies. Most animals that can fly have very small bodies and are lightweight and have really large wingspans. And this enables them to get up in large wings and flaps of skin that stretch out between their long fingers. And that enables them to change the shape of their wing as they're flying, makes them really good hunters. A hummingbird not only is able to fly, but they can also hover and stay stationary. And in order to do that, they have to beat their wings 90 times per second to stay in the air. Many insects can fly, from bees to flies to wasps to butterflies. Monarch butterflies are pretty impressive flyers, and they make a 4,500 kilometre journey from North America to Mexico during migration. A bumblebee has a really fat, fluffy body shape, and that makes it really difficult to get airborne. But it overcomes this by flapping its wings over 200 times every second. And it also rotates its wings at the same time to increase the amount of force and lift and take flight. Flying fish perhaps don't fly, but they certainly can get airborne. These fish have enormous fins and tails compared to their body size, and they can beat them rapidly to generate enough force and lift off the water surface and get into the air. And they can glide in the air for up to 45 seconds. Some lemurs have an extra flap of skin connecting their bodies to their arms and act like wings, so they can glide from tree to tree. So how does a bird or another flying animal fly? Well, there are 4 main forces involved with the science of flight. Let's explore them. Firstly, we need to think about thrust. Thrust is the force that's going to propel the bird forward. And to start with, the bird's going to have to get off the ground or the surface that it's going to take flight from. And it does that by using its muscular legs to push off from the floor and get up into the air. The second force involved is lift. Once the bird is in the air, there has to be enough upward force against its wings to keep it airborne. and lift is that force. The shape of a bird's wing is really important. It has to be aerodynamic to create the best lift possible. And a bird will also flap its wings to keep itself in the air. But even when a bird or a flying animal doesn't flap, its wings have to be specially shaped to be able to glide through the sky. The third force we need to consider is gravity. As soon as the bird's in the air, it needs to stay there, and gravity is going to be working on it, trying to bring it down. So it's going to have to fight gravity. And this will work opposite the force of lift. So the bird will need to create enough lift to overcome the force of gravity. The fourth force we have to consider is drag. Drag is the force that pulls objects back. We often feel drag if you're out on a bicycle ride and the wind's blowing against you. You can feel it pushing your body backwards. And the same force is going to be acting on the bird. As the bird is travelling through the air, it's going to feel the drag against its body, acting opposite its thrust. So in order for a bird to fly, it's got to have enough thrust to propel it forward and overcome the drag that's working in the other direction, and enough lift to keep it up in the air to overcome the force of gravity that's trying to pull it down. And that's an awful lot of science to consider for such a little bird to be able to fly. For hundreds of years, many scientists, engineers and inventors tried to design flying machines based on the flight of a bird. In the late 15th century, a very famous artist and inventor called Leonardo da Vinci designed and built a machine with flapping wings called an ornithopter. Unfortunately though, it never got off the ground. But the first mechanically powered flight didn't happen until 1903, when the Wright brothers had mastered their design. And it was their perseverance and ability to keep trying that got them to this point. They constantly redesigned their original plan, used their scientific and engineering skills, along with some tinkering and some problem solving, some trial and error, to finally create a mechanically powered flying machine. And it's this contribution to science that the Wright brothers made that other scientists have been able to evolve and build on those ideas and create what we know as the aeroplanes that fly us places today. Building an aerodynamic wing that actually creates enough lift was one of the largest challenges that they had to overcome. So let's take a look at what shapes are aerodynamic and can create lift. So for this experiment, we're going to have a look at how an aeroplane's wing works and create an airfoil. So we're going to take a couple of blobs of Blu Tack and stick them on the table and push 2 bamboo skewers, one into each blob. I've put them point down so that the blunt ends at the top. We're going to need a piece of cardboard, and this piece of cardboard is going to be the aeroplane's wing. We're going to investigate the shape of the airfoil and see what effect it has on lift. So this is cut from a piece of A4 card, so it's the width of the A4, about 25 centimetres long and about 10 centimetres wide. And I'm going to hole punch a hole at either end on the sides. And we're going to slot those onto the bamboo skewers. So we want to make sure that the bamboo skewers are about the same width away. So we're going to use a hairdryer to test the shape of the aeroplane wing out and see if there is enough lift on its own. So even if I'm blowing at the bottom or if I'm blowing underneath the cardboard, it won't stay afloat on its own. I'm going to take a piece of paper that's a little narrower than the piece of card so it can fit through the bamboo skewers. And we're going to wrap the paper loosely round and just sellotape it up at one end. Okay. So now we've got this airfoil over our wing. So we're going to test it out with a hairdryer and aim the air at the base. And let's have a look what the airfoil can do. You can see that the airfoil's made a massive difference and created the lift of the aeroplane's wing. So what would happen if our airfoil was a different shape? So this shape will only create lift if we get the air directly underneath the wing, but it's not happening if it's hitting head on. So how does this airfoil give the aeroplane's wing the lift it needs? Well, it's all to do with the way in which the air is travelling above the wing and below the wing, and it uses Bernoulli's principle. And if you've not learnt about the Bernoulli principle, do check out the Bernoulli effect video. Basically, what's happening is air is moving faster over the top of the wing, and this is creating a lower air pressure than the air underneath the wing. And this air underneath the wing is now acting in a higher air pressure than what's above. So it means that this air is going to try and join in, and it does that by moving around the top of it and going over. So air is flowing in this direction above the wing, and then it's moving around and up underneath the wing, and that is what creates the lift. Have a go at testing other shapes with the same setup and see what shapes are capable at getting more lift, and whether the shape of the airfoil will make a difference to the speed of the air travelling past. Another great way we can have a look at aerodynamics and check out the lift of an aeroplane's wing is by making paper aeroplanes that you can make and test and try at home for yourselves. There's the Delta, the Arrow, the Dart, the Condor, and the Dragonfly. And here's a paper aeroplane that's actually had a world record, and it was designed by John Collins. So do go and check out his YouTube channel as he designs paper aeroplanes that can break world records. They're pretty cool. This one can travel a really long way. Beautiful. And if you've checked out the Bernoulli effect video, you'll also know that hoop paper flyers are really aerodynamic. So we're going to use that design to make our own hoop aeroplane. So for this experiment you need a paper straw, some sellotape, and either the template or some A4 paper. It's going to make the larger hoop first, and that's using half an A4 piece of paper lengthways, and we're going to fold it up so that it's nice and thick. So we're going to fold the dotted lines and fold over again and again, and there's one strip. And in order to turn this into a hoop, we need to put lots of bends in it. So the best way to do that is to hold either end of the paper and run it over the edge of the table, and then we can put the two ends together and tape it. There's our first hoop, and then we're going to do the same thing with the smaller piece of paper, folding on the dotted lines to make a thicker strip, bending it into a hoop, and then sticking the two ends together. Now we've got the two sized hoops, we're going to stick them to the straw. So I'm going to put the smaller hoop at the front of the plane. Just tack a little bit of sellotape on the inside. And I'm going to put the larger hoop on the back of the plane. And there is our hoop plane ready to fly. So we can see the shape of the wing has a big effect on providing lift for a plane, and if we interfere with that shape too much then it becomes less aerodynamic, or it might create less lift to be able to get the plane up into the air. And as with all designs, to get to that point where something actually works, it takes a huge amount of trial and error. And nothing could be harder than a little bit of rocket science. And launching a rocket would involve the same 4 forces. And we can see that by playing around with the shape of a nose cone. So if we take a semicircular shape like this one here and fold it in half and put a little bit of tape down the edge and stick it over, we create a little cone shape. Now the surface area at the tip of this cone is really small, so that will make our rocket really aerodynamic, but the larger that it spans out towards the edges and the wider it gets, it means that we're likely to get more drag. So we're going to have a look at these forces with this rocket. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue tack and drop it into the nose cone, and then going to take a really short, small cocktail straw and push that into the blue tack. If you don't have a straw, a cocktail stick would work just as well. So we've got a narrow rocket body and a pointy nose cone, and then we can use air as a force to launch it. And with this paper rocket, we can see that we're providing thrust in order to get the rocket up, but then gravity is pulling it back down again, and we're also getting what we call drag and air resistance. And air resistance happens when we have a larger surface area. And I can show you that with a piece of paper. So I have 2 A4 pieces of paper here. They're identical, they're exactly the same, they'll weigh the same, they're the same shape, they're the same size, everything's the same. The one thing that isn't the same is the air in the room. And if I hold them at high, at the same height, and drop them at the same time, they're very unlikely to fall in the same place and land at the same time. And this is all to do with the air moving. As we drop the piece of paper, gravity's pulling it down. We've got a huge amount of air that's moving around underneath the paper. And this is what we call air resistance. So the air is actually pushing up in the opposite direction to gravity pulling down. And the movement of the air will be affected by differences in pressure and temperature that's happening in our homes. But there is a way that we can have a different effect with our 2 pieces of paper. What if we change the shape of one of them? Let's scrunch it up. Now these 2 pieces are still the same weight, we haven't changed what they're made of at all, but what we have changed is their size and its surface area. And if we held them at the same height and dropped them at the same time, it's very unlikely that they're going to land at the same time, and we can see why. Our scrunched up piece of paper has a much smaller surface area, so this means that less air can act on it to slow it down, and gravity then can work its full might on that piece of paper, pulling it towards the ground. Whereas this piece of paper has much larger surface area, so there's more space for the air resistance to push up and work opposite gravity. And this is what we see in our little paper rocket. A small surface area at the tip of the nose cone means it can fly through the air with ease. It has less drag working against it when it goes up, but then there's less surface area to act on it to slow its descent when it comes back down. And that would be really hazardous to a rocket. So how does a rocket come back down safely? Well, it uses air resistance. It will have a small surface area to travel up and a larger surface area to bring it back down safely in the form of a parachute. Now before we look at parachutes, let's see if we can make our rocket a bit more aerodynamic. So these paper rockets are much more aerodynamic. They have much slimmer bodies and even have fins to help stabilise. So let me show you how to make one. We're going to need to print out the template onto paper. So here's one of the templates that I've already cut out. And quite simply, all we're going to do is to roll it round a pencil. Once you've rolled it round, you can either tape it or you can glue it. Whilst it's still on the pencil, you might find this the easiest point to add on the fins. There are 2 slightly different rockets. They both got the same body shape, but what we're testing is the size of the fins here to see how the stability changes as well. So following my template, I'm going to stick my fins at the bottom. And to do that, I'm just going to fold the fins so that there's a rectangle to stick it down with, and I'll use some glue. Now my fins are securely stuck, I can remove the pencil from the middle, and you'll see we've got a completely hollow tube with the fins on the outside. And we're going to use air in the same way to force the rocket off of a straw, just like we did to provide the thrust for this rocket. And that means that we're going to need to make an airtight seal at the top. So quite simply, all we're going to do is squeeze the top about 1 centimetre from the top, pinch it and fold it over, and then just tape that together. And then you can slide it freely onto the straw and see how far it goes. And then you can make comparisons between the two rockets and see whether the size of the fin makes any difference to its stability and whether it can keep its flight path going in the direction that you want it to. Now we've made a more aerodynamic rocket, we want to think about the air resistance for a parachute. Now a great way to explore parachutes is to use a little cuddly toy. So this little panda is going to go on a little flight. He's even got his flying goggles on ready to be on the safe side. And we've got a big parachute. Now this parachute was made from scraps of material, but you can use something just as simple as a plastic bag to have a go at the same effect. So you can use a plastic bag like this one. So we can open the bag up to make a nice big sheet of plastic like this, and we can make the parachute out of this. And you could just put holes in the corners and have a go at squared material, or if you fold your bag up, you could have a go at cutting it into a circle. And it will be just an approximate circle. And then you could attach more threads or more string to it to make a large parachute. Now, because this plastic is quite thin, what I would suggest is to take a little bit of tape and tape over front and back where you're intending to put the hole before you add on the string. And this will stop any tears happening. So where I've sellotaped, I'm just cutting out little sections to make holes, and then I can thread in the string for the parachute. And I've made 8 holes all the way around my parachute. And they're going to take 4 pieces of string that are about the same width as my parachute, and I'm going to tie them in opposite sides. So now I've tied all 4 pieces of strings into the opposite sides of the parachute. We can pull them all together in the middle. And then I'm going to tie them together in the middle there with another bit of string, and the rest of the string is what I can tie Science Mouse to, or your cuddly teddy bear, and then Science Mouse is ready to go on an adventure. A helicopter has a different method for taking flight, and instead of using thrust like a rocket to go straight up in a really aerodynamic shape, it has these blades that spin around, and they work by pushing air downwards so that the helicopter can travel in an upward direction, and it creates lift. So whilst the helicopter has to have a certain amount of an aerodynamic shape and a stability fin at the back, it's all to do with Newton's third law of motion. And this is where we have equal and opposing forces. Sir Isaac Newton proposed that for every action in one direction, you get an equal and opposite reaction in the other. We see that with a balloon filled with air and letting it go. When we let it go, the air pushes out in one direction and the balloon will go the opposite. And we can see that here too. As the blades are angled, or a bit bent out of shape in this toy, it will actually push air downwards so that the helicopter can travel in an upward direction. We can see this science here. So we've got a little spinner and we've got angled blades at the tops. And if we spin and rotate these blades fast enough, I can feel the air pushing downwards, and that means it will travel up. Now we've got 3 types of paper copter spinners here, and we can have a go at making all of them. And to do this, we're going to need to print the template. And this is much better printed on a little bit of card rather than paper. It seems to work a little bit better if it's a bit heavier at the bottom. So let's have a go at making a paper helicopter with 2 blades, one with 3 and one with 6. And then we can see what the results look like. Firstly, we're going to cut out the template for the paper copter with 2 blades. And we want to cut down the blades all the way to the dotted lines. So these solid lines need a snip. So then we've got the blades at the top and the bottom will get folded. So we're going to fold this bottom section into 3, like this. And that just makes it nice and thick and a little bit heavier. We're then going to fold this bottom section underneath and hold it together with a paper clip. And the paper clip will just give it a little bit more weight at the base so that when we throw it up into the air and we test out our paper copter, the weight will pull it down so that it's the right orientation. And we're going to fold these paper blades in different directions. So one's going to go down and forwards and the other's going to flip backwards. And this design also works like nature does, with seeds that can get dispersed in the wind. And as we drop it, we can see the spin. Now we're going to try the tri-blade. So this is actually the base, and then this is the blades that we need to cut out. Again, the solid lines need to be cut. So we've got the 3 blades at the top. And the bottom part's going to get folded. Now this is a much thinner base part, so do go careful and make sure you don't tear it off. Now the base has been taped together, we're going to fold the middle section into a triangular shape, and then we can pull down the helicopter blades and fold them on the dotted lines. Now this helicopter should be okay to drop down on its own with the longer stem pointing downwards, but if it is flipping over, add a bit more weight to the base and you can add a paper clip at the bottom. Once we've cut out the template for the 6-sided paper copter, again we need to cut down the blades to make them individual and separated. And then we're going to fold across the lines 1, 2 and 3. Now it's pre-folded, what we're going to do is we're going to tuck the middle panel underneath and just fold it like that. And if I turn it round, you can see that these individual parts line up with the helicopter blades. And what we're going to do is to cut them to match the helicopter blades. We're going to stick them on so that they have an extra bit of support. We want to do that once we've created our hexagonal shape. So firstly, all we're going to do is to glue these 2 sides together. So I've popped my glue on. I'm going to squeeze the 2 together. Now I'm going to fold the edges. We've got a little tab here that we can add some glue and then tuck it inside to complete that hexagon shape and stick it together. So there's our hexagon. Now what we're going to do is to stick these supportive flaps to the blades, but we want to do that while it's upside down so that it can hold the blades open. So I'm just going to go round and glue the flaps on. And this means when we turn the helicopter the other way up, those blades are now nice and open and able to use air resistance to push up. Now I've found that even when I've made this out of cardboard, it's still quite light and it has a habit of flipping over. So I'm going to add a couple of paper clips to the opposite side. So I've just added 2 paper clips on opposite sides just to balance it out. And it works really well if it's dropped from a height. Now I have found that if we want this one to spin, we're best off if we put a little crease in the ends of the blades just to give it a little tilt and make it rotate, just like the angle we'd see in a helicopter blade. So let's test out our helicopters. And there we can see air resistance at work, making our helicopter blades spin around and slowing the descent of these objects. Pretty cool science. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the science of flight today and all the forces involved. I'm going to go and fly my glider, and we'll see you again soon for a video all about other forces. So we'll be looking at the energy that's stored inside of toys. Have fun, stay safe, and see you soon.